Hey, welcome everybody. This is John Paul Maduch with It's a Paul World, and we have yet another special guest, and he is coming to us from beautiful Atlanta, Georgia, and he has got a very great and interesting story. And let's welcome him in right now, Zilvinas. He's allowed me to just call him Z. And welcome to It's a Paul World, and let's talk a little bit about what you're going to be talking about at FreedomFest. But more importantly, this goes beyond that. You know, you're really on a mission to make sure that we don't go as a society down the wrong road. Understand that you came here from Lithuania. For those of you who don't know where Lithuania is, go check it out. And if you read the history of Lithuania, these guys have a really, really good reason to be pissed about what happened years ago. So they did not get a square deal. So Z, welcome.
Thank you for having me. And yes, we at Lithuania, we've seen what socialism looks like and what communism looks like, and no thank you.
So it's that simple. Interview's over, done. Socialism's bad. We got it right from the expert. But talk to me about that. I mean, obviously growing up in Soviet Union and then watching that finally crumble. Talk about your journey and what you saw.
Well, so I was born in 81, so that was like late 80s socialism or late 80s communism. So if you ever want to see people dissatisfied or disbelieving in socialism, thinking it's a joke, go to a sort of 1980s Soviet Union. So I mean, that's the reason why people were mostly anti-communist, anti-socialist. They come from places that actually lived through it. So my experience, obviously, I was young, but I remember things. I remember you couldn't speak you couldn't say what you wanted. This was a little incident. So we were playing Cowboys and Indians. That's, Soviet Union had its own, actually, Eastern Yugoslavia and Westerns were popular in Soviet Union because that's always the noble savage fighting against capitalism. So Karl May, Winnetou, and all these Native American leaders, they were popular in the Soviet psyche. So we used to play Cowboys and Indians, but one day we started playing Americans versus Russians. And, I lived in a white block of flats and some of my friends lived in a red block of flats. So obviously we called the white block of flats the White House and the red house the Kremlin, because Kremlin is red. And we made these little tags, names and the American flag on it. And very quickly our parents gathered us and said never to do that again.
Wow.
So, that was probably the first time I kind of practically experienced that there are some things you're not allowed to say. Which, of course, is kind of funny because it's kind of how many people feel these days in the United States, that, there are some things you're not allowed to say, there are some things you shouldn't say, or you should look around your shoulder if anyone's listening. So that's kind of eerily reminiscent. Now, I hope it's just a phase and a passing phase. But I know you didn't ask that question of me, but I see some sort of resemblance of basically people self-censoring, people looking over their shoulder, and that's not good. So basically, that's the last days of Soviet Union.
Well, and the interesting thing is that the left, as I was coming of age, as I was growing up, I went to a very unique private school, and to say that these people we were on the left, and but the interesting thing about it is that we were fighting against oppression of being able to speak, being able to say things, to be able to put things out there, to go out there and say these things, and yet now we see that the left is on the other side of that, and high degree of censorship. I quickly learned that was not the case. I mean, the more people I met, if you're a libertarian, I'll tell you, if you're in a lifeboat and there's a liberal and there's a hard conservative, go to the conservative, because the conservative has self-preservation and they're going to try to help you out. The left, the communist, the socialist, what they're going to do is they're going to try to explain to you how if we just all got collectively together, the boat isn't going to sink. So they're not practical at all.
No, I'd say it's even worse. Probably the socialist, the communist will send you to plug the hole or to fend off the sharks. I mean, you mentioned Chernobyl, and so I have two stories about Chernobyl. So one, it exploded in April 26, 1986. So on May the 1st, 1986, my parents skipped the mandatory May Day parade and we were sunbathing. The only reason why we're sunbathing after the radiation incident is because no one told the people that Chernobyl had just exploded. It was only after radiation reached Sweden and people really freaked out that Soviets finally admitted, oh, by the way, we just had the worst nuclear disaster ever. That's my one story, basically, sunbathing under the radioactive cloud, and that was still better than going to the May Day parade. So that's story number one.
Now, this may explain the glow that we're seeing off of him right now. So this may explain that glow. We may have that. Yeah.
That's a Georgia's son. And second point about the lack of value in human life is, once again, it's quite sort of well portrayed in the Chernobyl series, but actually that's what happened. It's Soviets call these people biorobots. Now they send in real robots to clean up the mess, but robots malfunction because of high radiation dosage. So they said, you know what? Well, let's just send people in. And they call biorobots, just because I guess even to the Soviets saying we are sending people to certain death didn't sound good enough, so we called them biorobots. So that's my point. If you're in a boat with the socialist and the libertarian, the conservative, the libertarian and conservative will try to help you. The socialists will sort of throw you overboard and say, comrade, for the greater good, now feed those sharks so I may survive.
Thank you for the correction. I think you're right. It's interesting because it's one of those things that people have a hard time grasping the ramifications of this seduction. So why do you think there's this seduction, especially for those who are younger, for socialism, for communism? Why is there this seduction? Why does it exist?
I agree with the word seduction. I don't think it's that bad. I think young people, they want to rebel. There's that. And if you ask them, if you truly ask them the question, do you believe that the government should make all decisions in your life? Or do you believe the government should decide how many types of Coca-Cola we should have? Do you believe that the government should own all the buildings, all the factories, and everything that is there in a country, which is truly socialism? I think they wouldn't agree to that. In fact, we've done our own studies, we've done our own polls. A bunch of people are confused. On one hand, the same person would agree with socialism and the American dream. The same person would agree with, America is a great place and that socialism is a great place. So I think what's actually happening is kind of a misrepresentation. So we have charismatic people like Bernie Sanders and AOC on one hand. Now, they're not charismatic to me, but I can imagine the appeal. It's counterculture. It's an old fellow standing up to corporations, et cetera, et cetera. And on the other hand, you have this misinformation campaign in which, how many young Americans have been to Denmark? Probably two, not 2%, but 2 individuals. And they say, socialism is like in Denmark, and Denmark is great, but Denmark is not socialism. In fact, it came to such levels of idiocy that the Danish prime minister, when talking to Harvard Business Club, said, guys, let me get one thing straight. Denmark is not socialist. We are a free market economy. We just, have higher taxes and some things there and there, but here and there, but, Danes openly say we are not socialists, stop calling us socialists. The true socialists are the Soviet Union, the Venezuela, the Cuba, the North Korea. That's true socialism. And of course, Bernie Sanders, AOC, and all the others say, well, that's not really socialism. So what's happening is they're kind of pointing fingers, playing a little bit of a misinformation game. I would bet a substantial amount of money if we could transport a young person to Cuba, a young socialist, if we can transport him to Cuba or Venezuela, in 3 weeks, he would want to go back.
Well, and I think that's a good point. If you haven't experienced it, if you can just look at it, you can say, oh, that looks like an ideal world, until you start looking at what the ramifications are because of that. Whenever I meet a Bernie Sanders somebody who loves Bernie Sanders, I always like to tell, this is my favorite Bernie Sanders story. I have no way of verifying it. I read a book, but here goes. You may have heard this one. So Bernie Sanders was a mayor long before he was anything else. And, he's a young guy and he walks into a bar and it's a Friday, and he walks up and gets to the bar and he says, I want a draft beer, and gets a draft beer, and it was 95 cents. So he puts $1 down, and the bartender takes $1 and starts working, helping other patrons. And, the line starts stacking up, and he comes back, and here's Bernie Sanders. And he says, can I help? Can I help you get anything? He goes, I'm waiting. And Bernie Sanders looks at him and says, I'm waiting for my nickel. Now,
okay.
But to me, from my days of, Z, you don't know my background, but, I gambled professionally for 4 years. And then I got, came back to the real world, as I call it. And what I do is when I consult with people and somebody says, do you think this is going to be somebody who's going to perform well for my company? I always like to see how well they tip. And all I can tell you is that if you're a guy who's not going to even give a nickel, you're not going to be very performant. You're not going to be very giving. I mean, you're not going to do that. So anybody who's out there, who's young, who's sitting there, who's waiting on tables, remember, Bernie Sanders wants his nickel back. Just remember that.
I had another story, and that's actually a true quote. So from time to time, I like to read the leftist newspapers just to see what they're up to. And I'm not talking like CNN or MSNBC. I mean true leftists, the Workers' Vanguard, the Spartacist League, like the true socialists, the true communists. And they had an editorial a couple of years ago in which they kind of mused that, well, many of our comrades rejoice because there's Bernie Sanders and all this rejuvenation of the left. But let us make it clear, Bernie Sanders is not a socialist. He's a member of the ruling class. He's been in the Senate for 25 years. He's a capitalist lapdog. And I thought, well, I usually disagree with you guys, but I think you have a point. I mean, you cannot spend 3 decades in the government and then claim to be counterculture. You cannot be an independent and Democrat at the same time. So yeah, I think there's a huge deal of hypocrisy. If we ever had $1 for every time socialists are hypocritical, I think we'd be very rich. But once again, back to your question, I think what's happening, I think it's better when it looks like. Bunch of kids are confused. But they definitely don't want Stalin's death camps here. They don't want government owning everything, but they're confused about definitions, and it's up to us. It's up to their peers. It's up to people who know better to actually explain what the difference between socialism and capitalism is, and that's what we do at Foundation for Economic Education.
So yeah, give me an example of one of the things that you do as an outreach to help dispel some of these falsehoods, some of these misnomers.
So we have everything we do falls into 2 buckets. One of them is classroom, and another one is online. And that's because we tend to target young people now. And from our experience, they're either in the classroom or online, or these days, I guess that's both. So one thing we do, we send professors to schools. We send professors to high schools, to public schools, private schools, and they do a 4 to 5 hour lecture with examples about how economics works, how government doesn't work, what's liberty, what's not liberty. And those have been great. We had 20,000 students last year. And the good thing is, as some of the schools are, we have something like 100% reinvite rate. Teachers, students actually hungry for the message. And the thing, we poll the students afterwards. We say, well, what did you learn, et cetera, et cetera. And they say, well, I've never had liberty explained to me like that. So I think that's spot on. For a long time, we, the conservatives, the libertarians, people on the right, we had allowed the left to do the talking for us, right? They speak about what capitalism is. They speak about what free market is. We're gonna just keep silent about it. And those chickens came to roost. And after 30 years of I guess, bashing of capitalism, some people truly started believing that socialism is a great thing. So education is one thing we can do here.
So you do that. Now you're going to be at FreedomFest, and so what topics are you going to cover at FreedomFest, and what are you going to be doing there?
Well, we're going to be talking about once again what to do about young people. What's the state of the country? What's the state of young people? What to be done about this sort of supposed or perceived enumeration with socialism among young people? That's one. And 2, we're going to talk about what socialism was. And I'm going to be on an excellent panel with people who also have lived through socialism. And of course, I know FreedomFest is it's a friendly crowd. It's people who kind of think like us. But I think even for them, it will be some stark reminders about what we're actually fighting for. Because it's not just lower corporate income tax. It's not just school choice. It's much more profound than that. I think we truly are the fighters for liberty. And I think we're just being a little too humble about this. Even if I, as a foreigner, I can say, well, Americans are being too humble about this. What I tell to my European friends, and sometimes even to my American friends, I said, what do you think would happen to the world if America is gone to socialism? Where will you emigrate to? There is no plan B. There is no USA number 2. If America goes socialism, I'll bet a substantial amount of money that the whole world will follow. So I'm not in any way trying to bang my own drum here, but what we're doing right now, what we're doing here is important.
Well, excellent. And have you been to Freedom Fest before?
Yes, I have. I've been to lovely Vegas, and joining you guys in South Dakota is going to be even more interesting. Never been to South Dakota, so first time there.
Well, okay. And at this point in time, I always like to give everybody directions on how to get to Rapid City. So if you are an American and you don't understand the interstate highway system, you have to go back to your fourth grade teacher and get a refund. But here's what you do. You locate Interstate 90. You determine, are you east or west of Rapid City? And then you head in that direction. You know, if you're east of it, you head west. If you're west of it, you head east. And it is the wide spot in the road, with all due respect, because I know people in Rapid City in South Dakota, and you will find it, because I can tell you it's going to be a great event, and there's going to be a lot of good things that are going to happen. One of the best parts about it, and Z, I don't know if you experience this, is that you get into so many lively conversations outside of, the meeting rooms. Outside of that, there seems to be a lot of discussions. Not everybody agrees with everybody. It's a very eclectic, a very large group of people with different ideas, not that out of phase, but there are different ideas. And have you experienced that when you were at Freedom Fest?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're not a socialist convention, so we do have many ideas, and we have people who think for themselves. So if you wanna meet people who are sort of on your side but might have little different opinions, I take them to Freedom Fest. If you want to talk to people like myself who lived through socialism and now are sort of fighting for it on American soil, come to Freedom Fest, and it's a good overall event. You'll know it, and just like John said. Many of the best discussions are unscripted. These happen after the panel discussions. This happen over cocktails. So if you're a guy who likes discussing big things with smart people, come to Freedom Fest.
Well, excellent. And is your organization going to have a presence, a booth there?
Absolutely. Not only that, since this year we're celebrating 75 years of Foundation for Economic Education. We're one of the oldest think tanks and the oldest libertarian think tank in the US. So to celebrate that, we're going to have an opening toast at Freedom Fest. And not only that, we even have a special drink prepared for you, which is called Fee 75. It's a cocktail which is derived from the World War I French cocktail, which was called French 75. And that's what the American soldiers named it, because they said, well, it hits like a 75 shell, like a 75 millimeter shell. So we've redone it, we've tweaked it. It's Fee 75. It's in the first day opening toast. Be there. It's going to be a couple of speeches and a lot of cocktails.
Well, excellent. All right. Well, before I let you go, so how can somebody find out more about your organization online? How do we get to you?
Well, the easiest one is just go to fee.org. That's fee, like a fee that you have to pay. So fee.org. You can find us there. If you go to YouTube, you can also look for Foundation for Economic Education there, and you'll see our great videos that, once again, are produced for young audiences, and I guess audiences like myself. So if you want to see how we mix pop culture with a libertarian and capitalist and conservative message, and how we turn Avengers into a capitalist story, or how we explain how Batman is the ultimate capitalist superhero, go to YouTube and find Foundation for Economic Education.
Well, excellent. All right, and then how do you're sitting at a table, and again, I'm sitting there talking to somebody who's younger. They're buying into the dream of socialism. What are one or two things, talking points I can say to at least spark them, maybe open their minds a little bit? So what kind of language would you use for that?
Well, if they're honest, and if we're sort of having a semi-intellectual discussion, I would say all the things that you fight for, all the things that you hold dear, equality, justice, environmental protection, all of them were completely absent in Soviet Union and under socialism. If you care about environment, you shouldn't care for socialism, because socialist countries are the worst offenders when it comes to environment. If you care about justice, there is no greater caricature as justice in socialist countries. And if you're looking for equality, there is no equality in the socialism. There is a slogan of equality, but in fact, there is no equality. And once again, I could go back to my Soviet days, but just that's a little known fact, but party members and party apparatchiks, I guess, they used to have special shops in which regular people were not allowed. And the reason why regular people were not allowed is because in those special shops, they had imported goods from a decadent West or Eastern Germany that regular people could not get. So the party members, the connected people, they enjoyed the scraps, I guess, the little bit of a better life. But the divide was so large that they didn't want the people to see. So they created shops in which the regular people were not allowed. Everyone knew about it, and it was fine with everyone. Imagine something like that happening in the capitalist system. Imagining something like that happening in the United States. Impossible. So I would honestly try to appeal to that young person's integrity. If these are the things, if equality, liberty, justice, if these are the things that you're fighting for, you should fight for capitalism, not for socialism.
Well, on that note, I just want to tell everybody, if you have not made your reservations yet, you still have some time. And if you haven't started to travel, you still have some time. July 21st to 24th in Rapid City, South Dakota is FreedomFest 2021. And there is just a huge number of speakers. You'll never be able to get through all of them. That's one of the things is they offer that you can actually get this digitally. I'm talking about the entire conference, but you want to be at the conference because first off, you want to go get this amazing cocktail, and we may have to have a triage or something to help people out through it, and you'll meet some amazing and fantastic people. I know that I've done that over the years, and Z has been a gracious guest, and all I can say is that you need to hear from people who have experienced the oppression of that socialist yoke, and you need to hear it directly, because if not, you don't quite have the understanding of it. So go check that out with Freedom Fest, and more importantly, make sure that you go seek out the booth for his group and go talk to them and say, here I am, I saw it on It's a Paul World, and that's what we need to do. So Z, thanks a lot, and I really appreciate it. Looking forward to meeting you in South Dakota, and looking forward to meeting all of you there.
Absolutely. See you in Rapid City.